The night that changed everything didn't start out unusual. In fact, it was supposed to be one of the most important evenings of my father's career. Our house was glowing with expensive lighting, filled with the aromas of catered dishes, and carefully staged to impress his business associates. My mother had supervised every detail, down to the floral centerpieces and the polished silverware. To any outsider, it looked like the perfect family about to host the perfect dinner. But perfection in my family was always a mask, and that night it slipped in the most horrifying way. I remember the moment with excruciating clarity. We were seated around the table, our guests smiling politely as the conversation flowed. My father was in his element, basking in admiration, telling stories about his business victories. My mother, poised and elegant, played her role as the gracious hostess. I had rehearsed every mannerism, every word I might say if spoken to. I wore the dress my mother insisted upon, the blue one that, in her words, minimized my flaws. I sat straight, smiled at the right times, and tried to be invisible, just as I had been trained. But invisibility failed me when the conversation turned to social media strategy. One of the guests asked how our company was adapting to changing trends. For once, I had real knowledge to offer. It was my department, my research, my hard work. Without thinking, I spoke up. My words spilled out carefully measured, professional, informed. To my surprise, the guests nodded, impressed. Mr. Garcia even said my analysis was remarkably insightful. For a brief flickering second, I felt seen. Then I looked at my father. His face was polite, but his eyes were burning. I knew that look. I had grown up under that look. Rage disguised as composure. To everyone else, he was the brilliant, charismatic businessman. To me, he was the man who could rush me with a glance, who made every mistake feel like a mortal sin, and I had made the gravest mistake of all. I had outshone him in front of people whose approval he desperately craved. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of dread. My fork trembled in my hand as I forced myself to keep eating. My mother maintained her brittle smile, her eyes darting toward me with silent warnings. Stay quiet, don't make it worse. But worse was already coming. When the main course was set before us, it happened so fast that the room seemed to freeze. My father's hand shot out, iron-strong fingers gripping the back of my head. In one violent motion, he slammed my face into my plate. The crash of porcelain against my nose, the smear of salmon and sauce across my face, the sharp sting of humiliation, they collided all at once. My carefully styled hair was ruined, my dress stained, my dignity shattered. As I sat there, stunned, lifting my head with food dripping from my chin, my mother smirked. Not concern, not shock. A smirk, then a chuckle. At least now you're worth looking at, she said, as though mocking me in front of strangers was nothing more than clever banter. My father, cold as stone, added, She has no value, just a prop at my table. The room went silent. Our guests, people my parents wanted to impress, looked pale, horrified. One woman gasped. Another man half rose from his seat, unsure whether to intervene. Forks clattered against plates as people froze in disbelief. For years, my family had maintained the illusion of perfection, but in that moment the mask was torn away and everyone saw the truth. Blood mingled with the sauce as I fought to hold back tears. I excused myself in a whisper and stumbled away, my mother's voice trailing behind me, dismissing it all as clumsiness. But I knew this was not just another cruel episode in a long history of abuse. This was the moment that would eventually push me toward freedom. Because when outsiders finally saw the monster behind the mask, I couldn't unsee it myself. From the outside, we were everything a family was supposed to be. My father, Harold, was the successful entrepreneur who had built his company from the ground up. People admired his ambition, his drive, his wealth. Our house in the suburbs of Boston was the kind neighbors whispered about with envy. Perfectly trimmed hedges, an immaculate lawn, tasteful decor inside that looked like it belonged in a magazine. My mother, Diane, completed the picture, Gracious, elegant, always hosting the most dazzling charity events and dinner parties. To anyone looking in, we were the embodiment of achievement and refinement. And then there was me, their daughter, the final piece of the portrait. I was always dressed in designer clothes, always smiling in the carefully staged family photos, always presented as the perfect child. People often said I was lucky. They envied my life without realizing that every smile was forced, every gesture rehearsed. Because the truth was this: perfection in our home wasn't real. It was performance, a mask, a stage built to impress the world, while behind closed doors everything was different, colder, harsher, crueler. Even as a child, I knew that love in my house had conditions. Approval wasn't given freely, it had to be earned. And no matter what I did, the finish line always moved further away. I remember being 6 years old, bringing home an art project that my teacher had praised and displayed in class. My heart had nearly burst with excitement. I placed the drawing in front of my father, desperate for just one kind word. He glanced at it for half a second before saying, "Is this really the best you could do? The perspective is all wrong." At 6 years old, I didn't even know what perspective meant. What I did understand was that my joy, my effort, my achievement, it was never enough. My mother wasn't kinder. She was obsessed with appearances, witted, shaping me into something she could show off. "Stand up straight, Hazel. Smile more naturally, Hazel. That outfit makes you look chubby, Hazel." She chipped away at me with constant corrections. To the world, she was gracious. At home, she was relentless. When my younger brother Thomas was born, I thought things might finally change. Maybe with 2 children, the pressure would ease. Instead, his arrival only sharpened the contrast. Thomas was the golden child. His average grades were celebrated while my straight A's were treated as the bare minimum. His tantrums were dismissed as boys being boys, while my tears were labeled manipulative. He was praised for mediocrity while I was punished for imperfection. The favoritism was blatant, and yet to the outside world, we were still the shining example of a family done right. Even extended relatives noticed something was off. My grandmother once asked if everything was okay after she saw me flinch when my father raised his voice. But before I could answer, my mother swooped in and changed the subject. My Aunt Patricia used to give me worried glances whenever my father criticized me in front of others, but her concern never translated into action. No one intervened. No one stopped it. Silence protected the illusion. My father was the master of control. His anger lurked beneath the surface, always waiting for the smallest excuse to erupt. Business deal goes wrong? He punched the wall. Dinner not to his liking? He'd throw a plate. I learned early that my role was to avoid being noticed, to stay quiet, to anticipate his moods so I wouldn't trigger his wrath. My mother whispered instructions like warnings. Don't upset him. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't give him a reason. So, I became skilled at being invisible. At family dinners, I wasn't a child sharing stories of my day. I was a soldier in survival mode, bracing for interrogation. My father would ask, "What did you accomplish today to justify your existence?" It wasn't a question. It was a reminder that in his eyes, I had no worth unless I produced something. My mother would add her own barbs, subtle but piercing. Other children are grateful for less. We give you everything, Hazel, and yet you complain. That was the reality hidden beneath the perfect facade. To the world, we looked like a dream family. Inside, I was growing up in a nightmare. I learned to smile on command, to hide the bruises that weren't physical but just as real. I learned that appearances mattered more than truth, and that the cost of breaking the illusion was unbearable. And yet, even as I lived inside this prison of perfection, some small part of me noticed the difference between my family and others. Friends at school would talk about their parents hugging them, cheering for them, supporting them. I watched mothers defend their children, fathers who beamed with pride when their kids succeeded. I longed for that kind of love, but in my house, I was only a role to be played, a prop at my father's table. The facade fooled the world for years, but inside, I was slowly breaking. trapped between the person I had to pretend to be and the reality of who I was, a child desperate for love, but treated only as a reflection of my parents' egos. My earliest memories are not filled with warmth or laughter. They are filled with trying to be good enough, trying to be invisible when needed, trying to earn scraps of approval that never seem to come. Childhood, for most, is a time of discovery and joy. For me, it was a training ground for survival, where every smile had to be practiced and every gesture carefully measured against impossible standards. At 6 years old, I had already learned that love in my family came with strings attached. When I brought home that art project my teacher had praised, I believed for a moment that maybe, just maybe, my father would be proud. But his cutting words about perspective carved into me deeper than any blade could. My mother, standing by, simply criticized the way I was holding the paper, as though my posture was more important than the pride I felt. That was the rhythm of my childhood, small moments of hope crushed under the weight of constant disapproval. As I grew older, my parents perfected their methods of control. My father was blunt, his criticism sharp and unrelenting. If I received a 95 on an exam, he demanded to know why I hadn't achieved a 100. If I made a friend he didn't deem ambitious enough, I was forbidden from spending time with them. He micromanaged my life, reading my grades online, questioning every minor imperfection, vetting every person I tried to let into my world. At 12, when I was finally invited to a slumber party, a rite of passage for any kid, he interrogated the parents on the phone and ultimately decided it was inappropriate. That night, I cried into my pillow while imagining my classmates laughing and bonding without me. It wasn't just about missing a party, it was about being denied the chance to be normal. My mother's control was less obvious, but no less destructive. Her weapon was guilt. Whenever I expressed unhappiness, she countered with, "After all we do for you, Hazel." If I dared to complain, she reminded me that real children with real problems would be grateful for the life I had. She used material possessions as proof of love. Expensive clothes, designer furniture, the picture-perfect house. But those things could never fill the emotional void inside me. A home is supposed to feel safe, but ours felt tea like a showroom. Everything looked beautiful, but nothing was meant to be touched. Meals, especially, were performances. Around the dinner table, we weren't a family sharing stories. We were actors reciting our roles. My father interrogated me about my grades and accomplishments, demanding evidence that I was earning my keep. My mother chimed in with biting commentary about my posture, my weight, or the way I chewed. Every bite was swallowed with shame. Every night, I was reminded that I was not a daughter in their eyes. I was an investment, a project, a prop. When my brother Thomas was born, I thought the pressure might ease. I imagined that with 2 children, the weight of their expectations would be shared. But I was wrong. His birth didn't ease the burden. It amplified the difference. He was the golden child, their pride and joy. His mediocre report cards earned applause. His tantrums were excused as normal boy behavior. Meanwhile, my tears were labeled manipulation. His laughter was cherished. My silence was demanded. I watched my parents shower him with unconditional affection while I had to fight for every crumb of acknowledgement. That contrast taught me something devastating. Love in our family wasn't automatic. It was conditional, and I was failing the test. My extended family must have seen glimpses of the truth. My grandmother once asked me quietly if everything was okay at home, after she noticed how I flinched when my father raised his voice. I started to tell her, but my mother cut me off, steering the conversation elsewhere. My Aunt Patricia would sometimes give me looks, half pity, half worry, whenever my father openly belittled me, but she never said a word. No one did. Their silence told me that either they didn't believe me or that I wasn't worth protecting. By middle school, I had internalized the belief that I was fundamentally flawed. Why else would my parents treat me this way? I scrutinized myself constantly. Too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too cold. No matter how I shifted, it was never right. I learned to anticipate their criticism before it came, rehearsing my answers, adjusting my smile, trying to mold myself into the version of me they might finally accept. But that version was always out of reach, like chasing a mirage in the desert. School became my only refuge. I joined every club I could: debate team, orchestra, volleyball, student council. Anything that kept me away from the house. Achievements outside those walls felt like tiny lifelines, though even those victories were twisted at home. If I won an award, my father demanded to know why it wasn't bigger, better, more prestigious. If I earned praise, my mother warned me not to get a big head. What should have been my safe haven became just another battlefield for their disapproval. Looking back now, I realize my childhood wasn't childhood at all. It was indoctrination. A slow, relentless conditioning to believe that I had no worth of my own, that my only purpose was to serve as proof of my parents' success or as a target for their contempt. And the cruelest part was that I believed it. I truly thought the problem was me. That belief, that I was broken, would haunt me for years. It would follow me into my teens, into college, into every relationship I tried to build. Because when the foundation of your life is conditional love and constant criticism, it becomes almost impossible to imagine a world where you are enough simply because you exist. By the time I reached my teenage years, the weight of my parents' control had woven itself into every corner of my life. Childhood had already taught me that nothing I did was ever enough, but adolescence brought an entirely new level of scrutiny. It wasn't just my grades or my posture anymore. Now my changing body, my emotions, my dreams, everything became ammunition for their critics. My father's methods grew sharper, more personal. He'd always been demanding about my academics, but in high school he monitored me with near military precision. Every grade was tracked, every assignment analyzed. A score below 95% brought interrogations about why I was slacking. He logged into the school portal daily, ready to pounce on the smallest dip in performance. He called my teachers when he thought I wasn't being challenged enough. My education wasn't mine. It was his measuring stick, proof of whether I was shaping up to his impossible standard. But it wasn't just schoolwork. By the time I turned 13, my body itself became a target. The comments were relentless. "No man will want you if you keep eating like that." My father would sneer at the dinner table, his words cutting deeper than the food I could barely swallow. "You should be grateful we can afford braces. Without them, your smile would scare people." My mother added her own blows disguised as advice. She monitored every calorie I ate, pointing out my problem areas, reminding me which dresses flattered me and which ones made me look chubby. What should have been a time of self-discovery became a constant battle against shame. My reflection in the mirror was never good enough, not for them, and eventually, not for me. When it came to friends, my father kept an iron grip on my social life. He vetted anyone who came close to me, dismissing them as unworthy unless they met his standards of ambition. Most didn't. Sleepovers were forbidden. Parties were off limits. Even casual outings were scrutinized. I remember being 12 when he decided a slumber party invitation was inappropriate. I lay awake that night listening to the faint sounds of laughter in my imagination, feeling like I was already locked outside the normal teenage experience. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped asking. It was easier not to want things than to endure the humiliation of having them denied. But the control didn't stop at friendships. My dreams were policed too. From an early age, I had been fascinated by psychology. Maybe deep down, I was searching for explanations for the chaos at home, answers to why my parents were the way they were. By the time college applications rolled around, I had poured myself into that dream. I researched programs, applied in secret, and even won a scholarship to a prestigious university across the country. For the first time, I saw a possible escape. But my father found out. He intercepted the acceptance letter before I could even celebrate. I still remember the sound of the paper tearing as he ripped it to shreds in front of me. "Psychology is for people who can't cut it in real fields," he said with contempt. "You'll study business and join my company. End of discussion." My mother, as always, stood by his side, nodding in agreement. "Your father knows what's best for your future, Hazel. Why must you always fight him?" I felt the walls closing in around me. I had fought so hard for that chance, and it vanished in seconds. My father even called contacts on the university's board to ensure my scholarship was revoked. My future, my independence, my dream, gone. And in its place, the path he had chosen for me, his alma mater, his field, his company, my life, dictated. Even my attempts at love weren't safe. During my first year of college, I met Jake. He was kind, gentle, and for the first time, I felt what it was like to be valued for my thoughts and feelings, rather than my performance. After 3 months, I brought him home. It didn't take long for my father to start undermining me in front of him, telling humiliating stories, contradicting everything I said. Later, Jake confided that my father's behavior seemed controlling. It was the feuds. Same time anyone had ever said it out loud. But soon after, my father called Jake's family. He painted me as unstable, implied Jake was using me. The pressure worked. Jake's parents urged him to end things, and he did. That heartbreak was crushing, but not surprising. I had learned by then that anyone who got close to me eventually became collateral damage. My father's control wasn't just over me, it extended to anyone I loved. By the end of my teenage years, the message was seared into me. I was not allowed to be my own person. My body wasn't mine. My dreams weren't mine. Even my relationships weren't mine. They belonged to him, subject to his approval. And every time I tried to reach for freedom, he pulled me back with sharper claws. Looking back, I see now how thoroughly I had been conditioned. My teenage years weren't about discovering who I was. They were about unlearning myself, about shrinking into whatever shape would survive another day in that house. I thought that was normal. I thought that was love. But all it really was control. Graduating college should have been a fresh start. For most people, it's the launch into independence, the beginning of building a life shaped by your own choices. But for me, graduation was just another link in the chain my father had forged years earlier. He had decided I would study business, and so I did. He had decided I would work at his company, and so I did. My degree wasn't a door to freedom. It was a key he held, keeping me locked in the prison of his control. Walking into his company as an employee was like stepping onto a stage where every line of the script had been written for me. My father made sure everyone knew I was his daughter, but rather than using that connection to lift me up, he used it to cut me down. In meetings, he dismissed my contributions, often with a condescending chuckle. "Hazel is still learning," he'd tell clients or colleagues after I spoke. "She has a long way to go before she understands how things really work." It didn't matter how much research I had done or how prepared I was. My role was clear: sit quietly, absorb his criticisms, and never threaten his spotlight. The public humiliation wasn't confined to meetings. In the office halls, he criticized my work loudly enough for others to hear. If I made a mistake, no matter how minor, he broadcast it. If I succeeded, he claimed the credit. I became known not as Hazel, the competent professional, but as the boss's daughter, a label that carried more stigma than privilege. Colleagues avoided me, not out of dislike, but out of survival. They knew associating too closely with me meant being dragged into his orbit of control and scorn. There was one exception, Sophia, the marketing director. She was in her 40s, confident, sharp, and unafraid to speak truth. She saw what was happening almost immediately. After one particularly brutal meeting where my father shredded my presentation in front of the team, Sophia caught me in the hallway. Her words were simple, but life-changing. "What your father is doing is not normal. It's not acceptable in any workplace." No one had ever said that to me before. Hearing it out loud was like breathing fresh air after years in a windowless room. Sophia became a quiet mentor. She encouraged me when I doubted myself, reminded me that my ideas had value, and validated what I had endured at home. It was the first time I had an ally, and though I didn't yet have the courage to act, her belief in me planted seeds that would eventually grow into escape. At home, my mother's role shifted. She was no longer just an enabler. She became an active participant in tearing me down. I'll never forget the Sunday dinner where I wore a dress I had bought with my own money. It wasn't extravagant, just something that made me feel good about myself. She looked me up and down and said, "That color makes you look sallow. I don't know why you insist on highlighting your flaws." My father smirked in agreement. The ridicule had evolved into a tag team act. What once might have been a sliver of hope, that my mother would one day defend me, vanished completely. The dinner parties became a regular stage for this dynamic. Our family was still paraded as perfect, with my father bragging about grooming me to take over parts of the business, but behind his smile, he couldn't resist undermining me. "Hazel is still finding her footing," he'd say, with a patronizing pat on my hand. "She'll get there someday." Guests would laugh politely, unaware that I had spent weeks preparing the very reports he was presenting as his own ideas. Every party left me feeling smaller, more invisible. Yet for all the humiliation and control, a part of me clung desperately to the hope that one day I would finally earn their approval. That if I just worked harder, if I just achieved more, if I just endured long enough, they would look at me with love instead of disdain. That hope was a chain as strong as any physical restraint. It kept me in line, kept me quiet, kept me in their orbit, even when every instinct screamed to run. As the years passed, the intimidation became more physical. My father started grabbing my arm when I contradicted him, squeezing until his fingerprints bruised my skin. He towered over me in arguments, slamming his hand on the desk so hard my coffee mug jumped. "This is why women don't belong in business," he hissed once. "Too emotional to handle. Real pressure." My mother, instead of defending me, rolled her eyes and told me not to be so dramatic. By then, I was an adult on paper. I had a degree, a job, responsibilities. But in reality, I was still the same little girl, trapped, silenced, conditioned to believe that my worth depended on appeasing them. Every day at that company reminded me I wasn't there to grow or thrive. I was there to play a role in my father's performance. And the longer I stayed, the more I feared I would lose myself completely. The night of the infamous dinner was supposed to be flawless. It wasn't just another dinner party. It was the culmination of months of planning for a deal that could double the company's revenue. My father had invited the Wilsons, seasoned industry leaders, and the Garcias, a younger, innovative couple representing a fast-growing tech company. Securing both partnerships at once would elevate his reputation to new heights. Everything had to be perfect. At least, according to him, my mother made sure of it. From the color of the napkins to the garnish on the salmon, she micromanaged every detail. She even dictated my outfit, the blue dress she'd chosen because it hid my flaws. Her words echoed in my head as I stood in front of the mirror before the guests arrived. "Minimizes your flaws." It didn't matter that I had spent hours preparing myself. Hair styled professionally, makeup applied with care. In her eyes, I was still a collection of defects to be concealed. Still, I wanted to believe that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight, with the right smile, the right answers, the right performance, I might finally make them proud. I had even studied the company profiles and industry news so I could participate intelligently in the discussion. It was foolish hope, but hope nonetheless. When the evening began, everything unfolded like clockwork. My father charmed the guests with his confidence and commanding presence. My mother dazzled with her hostess persona. I sat quietly, speaking only when addressed, laughing politely when appropriate, doing everything in my power not to disrupt the perfect image. The first course was served, and conversation drifted toward business trends. Then came the moment that cracked the mask. Mr. Garcia asked about our company's social media strategy, an area I had been researching extensively. Before my father could answer, I found myself speaking. My voice was steady, my insights clear. I talked about emerging platforms, shifting demographics, and opportunities for growth. To my astonishment, the table fell silent, not with dismissal, but with interest. Mr. Garcia nodded approvingly. Mrs. Wilson added that my analysis resonated with challenges her own company was facing. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was validated. But the triumph lasted seconds. One glance at my father told me everything I needed to know. His smile remained, but his eyes, those eyes that had policed my every move since childhood, burned with rage. I had stolen his spotlight. I had contradicted him. And worst of all, I had impressed his potential clients on my own merit. The consequences were inevitable. The main course arrived, salmon with seasonal vegetables arranged artfully on fine china. My father reclaimed the conversation, steering it back toward his comfort zone. Traditional marketing strategies. I forced myself to stay silent, though my heart pounded with dread. Across the table, Sophia, the marketing director and my quiet mentor, gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. She had noticed my contribution and recognized its value, but her support only deepened my father's fury. When the topic shifted to family succession planning, the tensio snapped. Mr. Wilson, with a friendly smile, asked if I would one day take over the company. It was an innocent question, but it lit a fuse. My father's grip on his wineglass tightened. Hazel still has much to learn, he said dismissively. Running a company requires natural authority not everyone possesses. His implication was clear, not me, never me, and something inside me broke. For once, I didn't stay silent. Actually, I said, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice, our digital division has grown 30% under my direction this year. Client retention metrics are the highest they've ever been. The words hung in the air, undeniable, unspinnable. Mrs. Garcia smiled at me. Mr. Wilson looked intrigued. For one fleeting moment, I stood in my own truth. Then it happened. My father's hand shot out fast as a snake. He grabbed the back of my head and with violent force slammed my face into my plate. The crack of ceramic against bone, the smear of sauce across my hair, the sting of humiliation, it all collided in an instant. I sat back up, stunned, food dripping from my chin, blood mingling with the salmon. The silence at the table was suffocating. And then my mother laughed, not a full laugh, but a smirk, a chuckle. "At least now you're worth looking at," she said, her voice light, almost amused. My father, cold and unbothered, added, "She has no value, just a prop at my table." The guests' faces turned pale. Mrs. Wilson gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Garcia half rose from his chair, looking torn between intervening and keeping the fragile peace. Sophia's fork clattered against her plate. For the first time in my life, outsiders were witnessing the truth. The mask had shattered. I excused myself, my voice shaking, and staggered to the bathroom. Behind the locked door, I finally let the tears fall. Blood and food dripped into the pristine sink. My reflection stared back at me, smeared makeup, haunted eyes, a woman who barely recognized herself. And in that moment, I realized what I had been denying my whole life. This wasn't normal. This wasn't discipline or high standards. This was abuse, and it had to end. That dinner, which my parents had orchestrated to showcase our perfect family, had done the opposite. For the first time, others had seen what I had endured for decades, and more importantly, I had seen it too, clearly, undeniably. Something inside me shifted that night. I knew I couldn't keep living as their prop. Something had to change. After the dinner incident, I felt like I was moving through two different worlds. On the surface, life carried on as if nothing had happened. My parents acted like the assault at the table had been a minor embarrassment, something best forgotten. My father told colleagues I had suffered a dizzy spell. My mother scolded me for being dramatic and told me to be grateful he hadn't hit me harder. In their version of events, it wasn't violence. It wasn't humiliation. It was just another correction, another reminder of my place. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time, I couldn't silence the voice in my head whispering, "This is not normal." I had known it deep down my entire life, but I had never dared to fully name it. That night, the mask fell, and the world saw, even if just for a second, the monster I lived with. And once I saw their shocked expressions, I couldn't unsee it myself. The first glimmer of escape came from Sophia. That same evening, as I sat alone in the bathroom, my phone buzzed. A simple message lit the screen. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" It was from her. It was the first time anyone had ever acknowledged my suffering out loud, the first time anyone had offered help instead of silence. I stared at the message, trembling, not even knowing how to respond. Was I okay? Had I ever been? The truth was obvious. No. The next day at the office, whispers followed me. People averted their eyes, but I could feel the rumors spreading. My father summoned me to his office before noon. His calm voice was more terrifying than his shouts. "What happens in our family is private," he said. "Do you understand?" I nodded automatically, like the obedient child he had trained me to be. But then he added, "The Wilsons pulled out this morning. Millions lost because of your performance." He made it clear the blame was mine, as though I had forced his hand at the dinner table, as though I had chosen humiliation. And yet for the first time, I didn't believe him. That small shift, the ability to doubt his narrative, was monumental. And Sophia widened that crack. She invited me to meet her at a coffee shop a few blocks from work. I almost didn't go. Years of conditioning told me it was safer to stay silent, to avoid rocking the boat. But something inside urged me forward. She was waiting when I arrived, her face soft with concern. As soon as I sat down, she said words that broke me open. "Hazel, I'm so sorry. What happened was assault. It was abusive. It was criminal." No one had ever used those words before. For decades, I had been told it was discipline, that I was too sensitive, that I had provoked him. But Sophia shattered that lie. "Nothing you could have said or done justified what your father did," she said firmly. I tried to defend my parents, reflexive, automatic. They're not always like that. I provoked him. But she took my hand and said, "Hazel, nothing you did caused that. Nothing. Parents are supposed to protect their children, not destroy them." Tears spilled down my cheeks in that cafe, not just from pain, but from the staggering relief of being believed. After a lifetime of gaslighting, that validation was like oxygen. For the first time, someone else saw the truth and said it out loud. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't to blame. That conversation with Sophia was the first crack in the walls my parents had built around me. The first time I allowed myself to imagine that escape might be possible. The first time I realized I deserved better. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was the beginning. And beginnings, no matter how small, are what lead to change. Once the cracks began to show, I couldn't go back to pretending. Therapy with Dr. Lambert, which Sophia gently urged me toward, was the next step. Her office was warm, safe, and completely unlike the cold, judgment-filled spaces I had grown up in. She didn't tell me what to do. She asked questions no one had ever asked me before. "What do you want your life to look like, Hazel?" It stunned me. My wants had never mattered. I had spent decades bending to everyone else's expectations. For the first time, I was being told that my life could belong to me. With Sophia's mentorship and Dr. Lambert's guidance, I began to imagine the impossible, leaving. Of course, leaving my parents wasn't something I could announce outright. My father had eyes everywhere, at work, at home, even in my bank accounts. Any sign of independence would trigger his suspicion. If I wanted freedom, I would need to plan in secret. Sophia helped me start small. "You'll need your documents," she told me one afternoon. "Birth certificate, passport, social security card, anything they could use to trap you." I nodded, adding them to a hidden checklist on my phone. Each item I gathered felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Slowly, quietly, I moved essentials out of the house. A few clothes at a time, favorite books, small personal items that wouldn't raise alarms. Every step was risky, but every step felt like progress. Money was another obstacle. My father monitored all my accounts, proudly controlling my finances under the guise of teaching responsibility. Sophia introduced me to her financial advisor, who helped me open accounts in my own name, hidden from his reach. Depositing even a little felt revolutionary. For the first time, I was creating something that was mine, and mine alone. The search for a safe place came next. During lunch breaks, Sophia and I visited apartments across town, always careful to avoid locations my parents might suspect. Finally, we found one. A modest one-bedroom in a secure building, far enough away to feel hidden, but close enough to commute without raising suspicion. Signing the lease was both terrifying and exhilarating. I used Sophia's address for paperwork, ensuring no trace of the move reached my parents' hands. That apartment wasn't just a space. It was a lifeline, a promise of a life on my own terms. Meanwhile, I had to keep up the performance. At work, I smiled dutifully during meetings, allowed my father to take credit for my work, pretended nothing had changed. At home, I endured my mother's endless criticisms and my father's suffocating dominance. But inside, something had changed. I was no longer just enduring. I was preparing, and that quiet defiance gave me strength. Of course, my father began to sense it. His control thrived on total obedience, and my subtle shifts didn't go unnoticed. He started checking my computer at work, demanding explanations for unusual phone calls, even following me to lunch once. "You're planning something," he said one evening, his voice deceptively calm. "I can always tell when you're lying. Family loyalty comes first. Don't forget that." The words chilled me, but instead of breaking me, they confirmed my resolve. He was right. I was planning something, and the fact that he could sense his grip loosening only made me more determined. Then, as if the universe itself acknowledged my readiness, a new opportunity arrived. I received a job offer from a respected digital marketing firm in a neighboring city, one that valued my expertise rather than tolerated me as the boss's daughter. The salary was better, the role offered autonomy, and most importantly, it was outside my father's shadow. I accepted immediately, negotiating a start date 3 weeks out. Everything was falling into place. The apartment, the job, the hidden documents, the growing bank account. Sophia even offered to help with the final move. "You'll need a safety plan," she said. "The day you leave will be the most dangerous. He'll try to stop you." Her words rang with truth. Leaving wasn't just about walking away. It was about outmaneuvering a man who had controlled me my entire life. I agreed. We set a date. Each day leading up to it, I felt both terrified and alive in ways I had never known. The fear was real, but so was the hope. After 32 years of submission, I was preparing to step into my own life. Quietly, secretly, I was building an escape. The Sunday dinner that marked my final night under their roof looked, at first, like every other gathering before it. My mother fussed over the roast, the table gleamed with polished silver, and my father seemed unusually cheerful, bragging about a new client he had secured. My brother Thomas was home from college, completing the picture-perfect tableau. To any outsider, it was just another family dinner, but for me, it was the moment I had been preparing for. The moment everything would change. By then, most of my belongings had already been moved to my new apartment. My resignation letter sat, saved on my laptop, ready to be delivered. Sophia had agreed to wait in her car nearby, ready to take me away the moment it was done. All that was left was to speak the words out loud. The conversation at the table swirled around business and small talk, peppered with the usual subtle digs at me. My mother observed that I looked flushed. My father reminded everyone of his hard-earned victory in signing the Harrisons. I sat quietly, my heart pounding, my fork heavy in my hand. But unlike before, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't trying to disappear. This time, I was waiting for my moment. Finally, I set my fork down. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me, "there's something I'd like to share." The table went silent. My father frowned. "This is hardly the time for whatever drama you've concocted. We're celebrating." "This will only take a moment," I replied. I took a breath, felt my pulse in my ears, and spoke the words I had rehearsed 100 times in my head. "I'm leaving. The house, the company, this family dynamic. I've accepted a position at Morton Digital. I've rented my own apartment. Today is my last day here." For a moment, the silence was deafening. Thomas froze, fork halfway to his mouth. My mother's face drained of color. My father's expression shifted from disbelief to fury in an instant. "This is absurd," he hissed. "You're not going anywhere. You have responsibilities to this family and this company." "My responsibility is to myself now," I said, surprising even myself with the calm in my voice. "For 32 years, I've tried to earn your love and approval. I now understand that was never possible. Not because of me, but because of how you define love, respect, and control. I won't do it anymore." My mother gasped. "How dare you speak to your father this way after everything we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me?" I asked quietly. "Protected me, supported me, loved me unconditionally, or have you enabled his abuse while adding your own?" The word abuse landed like a thunderclap. My father practically spat it out when he repeated it. "Is that what your therapist is calling discipline now? High standards?" He sneered. "This victimhood mentality is pathetic." "How do you know I've been seeing a therapist?" I asked, my blood running cold. His smile was sharp. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? I know everything. Phone records, credit card statements. Nothing escapes me." But instead of fear, his words brought clarity. He had proven my point. Control was all he knew. "Yes," I said. "Therapy helped me see the truth. What happened at that dinner was not an isolated incident. It was part of a lifelong pattern, and I won't let it continue." He rose to his feet, towering over me, fists clenched. For a split second, I thought he might strike me. My instincts screamed to shrink, to apologize, to submit, but I stayed rooted. "Go ahead," I said quietly. "Show Thomas who you really are. Show him what happens when someone tells the truth." The room froze. My father stopped, caught between his rage and his need to maintain the facade. My mother tried to salvage the moment, her voice sharp with false calm. "Hazel, you're overwhelmed. We'll discuss this tomorrow." "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of my decision." "If you walk out that door," my father said, his voice low and dangerous, "don't expect to ever come back. You'll be cut off completely. No money, no job, no family." I stood, meeting his eyes. "What I want is what every child deserves. Love that doesn't have to be earned. Respect, safety. Since I can't have that here, yes, I'm prepared to walk away." Tears welled in my mother's eyes, but I recognized them for what they were, a performance. My father's threats sounded hollow, and for the first time in my life, their power over me broke. I picked up my pen. "Urs, the rest of my things are gone. My resignation is on your desk. I'm done." And with that, I walked out. The evening air hit my face, crisp and freeing. Sophia was waiting at the curb. As I slid into her car, she took my hand and whispered, "You did it." And for the first time, I believed it. I had broken free. The first night in my new apartment was both liberating and terrifying. The space was small, with plain white walls and bare furniture, but to me it felt like a palace. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without someone listening for the sound. I could move without fear of being watched. And yet, freedom came with its own kind of fear. I had never been in charge of myself before. Every choice felt overwhelming. What color towels should I buy? What should I cook for dinner? What time should I go to bed? These questions, trivial for most people, felt monumental to me. Dr. Lambert reassured me during our sessions. "This is normal," she said. "You've spent your life being controlled. It takes time to build your own internal authority. Be patient with yourself." Her words soothed the panic. Slowly I began to see that what felt like weakness was actually growth, the awkward first steps of learning to live for myself. 3 weeks after leaving, I began my new job at Morton Digital. On my first day, my boss Laura greeted me with a warm handshake and introduced me to the team I would be leading. "We're excited to have you," she said. "Your ideas for digital strategy are exactly what we've been looking for." The contrast with my father's company was staggering. Here, when I spoke in meetings, people listened. They wrote down my ideas. They respected my expertise. I wasn't just the boss's daughter. I was Hazel, a professional with something valuable to contribute. Of course, my father didn't let go easily. True to his nature, he tried to sabotage me. Within my first week, Laura casually mentioned that he had called her, warning her about my emotional instability and unprofessional conduct. My stomach dropped in fear, but Laura's calm response stunned me. "I judge people by their work and their character," she said. "So far, you've impressed me on both counts. Whatever's going on with your family is your business, not mine." For the first time, someone had chosen to believe in me instead of his narrative. My mother was no less relentless. She alternated between tearful pleas for reconciliation and angry accusations. "Your selfishness is tearing this family apart," one message read. Hours later, another came. "Your father only wants what's best for you." I showed the text to Dr. Lambert, who helped me recognize them as manipulation. Together, we set boundaries. I would not respond to emotional blackmail. I would only engage with messages that were respectful, and I would give myself permission to step back entirely if needed. Amid the chaos, there were moments of unexpected healing. My Aunt Elizabeth reached out, offering an apology for her years of silence. "I failed you," she admitted. "I convinced myself it wasn't that bad, but I was wrong." Her words didn't erase the past, but they mattered. They proved that people were capable of acknowledging harm, and that maybe not everyone would choose my parents' side. Most surprising of all was Thomas. Weeks after I left, he asked to meet for coffee. Sitting across from him, I saw my brother not as the golden child, but as someone beginning to question the story he had been fed. "I've been watching Mom and Dad more closely," he said quietly. "They treat me differently than they treated you. I didn't see it before, but now I do. Hazel, did he ever hit you?" I told him the truth, not often. He preferred emotional abuse because it left no evidence. But yes, sometimes it turned physical. Thomas nodded, his face pale. "I believe you," he said simply. 3 words I had ached to hear my whole life. 3 words that became another piece of my healing. Rebuilding my life wasn't a single moment. It was a series of small, steady steps. Setting up my apartment, decorating it with colors I loved. Building friendships not based on fear, but on trust. Leading a team at work that respected me for who I was. Each step felt like proof that I could exist outside my parents' shadow. That I wasn't broken. That I was, and always had been, worthy of a life defined by my own choices. The road wasn't easy. Some days I still woke up with old voices in my head, telling me I wasn't enough. But day by day, I learned to quiet them. Day by day, I learned to listen to my own voice instead. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. My escape didn't just change my life. It sent shockwaves through my parents' carefully constructed world. For decades, they had thrived on appearances, presenting themselves as the picture-perfect family. But once I left, that mask began to crack. And this time, there was no way to glue it back together. The first tremor came from the Garcias. After witnessing my father's violence at the dinner table, they quietly withdrew from business discussions, citing ethical concerns about corporate culture. The Wilsons followed soon after. In an industry where reputation matters as much as results, word traveled quickly. Partners began keeping their distance. Employees whispered. My father's empire, once untouchable, was now seen for what it truly was, toxic at its core. Inside the company, the fallout was even more telling. Sophia resigned, accepting a high-level position with a competitor who valued her leadership. Several other employees followed, unwilling to endure the climate of fear any longer. For the first time in his career, my father's dominance wasn't enough to keep people in line. His control had limits, and those limits were being tested. He responded the only way he knew how, with threats. He called me, demanding I return, warning me that I would regret my decision. He sent messages through relatives, insisting that family loyalty should come before selfish rebellion. But his words no longer had the same power. Once I had seen his control for what it was, abuse, they became nothing more than noise. My mother's approach was different. She alternated between emotional pleas and guilt-ridden accusations. One day she would beg me to come home, telling me I was breaking her heart. The next, she accused me of destroying the family's reputation and devastating my brother. Dr. Lambert helped me recognize these messages for what they were: manipulation tactics. I began setting firm boundaries, refusing to engage with anything that wasn't respectful. For the first time, I was choosing how and if I wanted to respond. The most unexpected development came from Thomas. Slowly, he began to see through the illusion. After our first conversation in the coffee shop, he continued to question what he had grown up believing. "They talk about you differently than they talk about me," he admitted. "It's always been that way, but I never noticed until you left." His recognition was bittersweet, proof that I hadn't imagined the difference, but also a reminder of how thoroughly my parents had manipulated our family dynamic. Still, hearing him say, "I believe you," was a gift I never expected to receive. Then, nearly a year after I left, a letter, arrived from my mother. For the first time, her words weren't filled with denial or manipulation. Instead, she admitted, cautiously, that there may have been problems in our family dynamic. She told me she had begun seeing a therapist, encouraged by Thomas. "I am not ready to accept everything you have said," she wrote, "but I am beginning to see that I may have failed you in important ways. If you would be willing, I'd like to meet someday, on your terms, in your time." It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't accountability in the way I needed, but it was something I had never seen before from her, a crack in her denial, an opening. When I showed the letter to Dr. Lambert, she reminded me, "Reconciliation is not required for your healing. It is an option, not an obligation." Those words freed me. For so long, I had believed that family ties were chains I had to carry, no matter how much they cut into me. Now I understood that I had choices. I could decide what role, if any, my parents played in my life. The fallout of my leaving wasn't neat or easy. My father's business faltered, my mother wavered between denial and regret, and Thomas began questioning everything he had once believed. But for me, the most important change wasn't in them. It was in me. For the first time, their reactions didn't dictate my worth. Their approval, or their disapproval, no longer defined me. That was the real victory. Not just leaving, but learning that I never needed their validation to begin with. Standing here now, looking back on everything, I see a story that once felt like endless darkness, but now glows with something I never thought I'd have: hope. For 32 years, I believed I was worthless, that love had to be earned, that cruelty was just discipline. My parents built an entire world around those lies, and I lived inside it. But the moment I stepped out, the moment I chose myself, that world began to collapse. And in its place, I began to build something new. Freedom didn't come in one triumphant moment. It came in small, shaky steps. Signing a lease for my own apartment, opening a bank account in my name, showing up to therapy, and daring to say the word abuse. Walking into a new job and realizing people respected me for who I was, not for the mask my father forced me to wear. Each of those steps felt terrifying, but each of them added up to something extraordinary, a life that belongs to me. Healing, I've learned, is not about erasing the past. It's about reclaiming the present. Some days, the old voices still echo, the ones that told me I was never enough. But now I know those voices aren't mine. They belong to people who needed control more than they could offer love. My voice, the real one, is quieter but stronger every day. It tells me I am worthy, I am capable, I am free. And here's what I want to say to you, the person listening right now. If any part of my story feels familiar, if you've ever felt invisible in your own home or trapped by people who were supposed to protect you, please hear this. You are not alone. The lies they told you about yourself are not the truth. The cage they built for you is not unbreakable. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to create a life that is yours. Leaving doesn't mean the fear disappears. It doesn't mean the pain is gone overnight. But every step toward freedom proves something powerful, that you deserve better. Because you do. We all do. So if this story resonates with you, I ask one thing. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it with someone who might need to hear that escape is possible. And if you feel ready, share your own story in the comments. Tell me what your turning point was. Tell me what helped you take the first step. Your story matters too. And if you haven't taken that step yet, if you're still in the dark, I hope my journey shows you that light is possible, that healing is possible, that freedom is not just for other people, it's for you. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for giving me the gift of being heard. And please, if you found even a piece of hope here, like this video, subscribe and share it. Because somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for a sign that they can break free. Maybe this will be it.